Hi chess kids, Dusan here from Gardiner Chess. In this video I will be analysing a game from the Junior Rapid series played between Clarrie and Mitchell. Our focus in this game is opposite sides castling and how to attack in that type of position. The game started e4, e5, bishop c4, so we have what's called the bishop's opening, and this often transposes to the Italian game, as in this case. So knight c6, d3, knight f6, and here we have a position that is common from the Italian. Black played bishop e6, white took, black took. So you might ask yourself, why did black choose to leave himself double pawns? Aren't double pawns always bad? Well, the answer is they're not always bad, and in this case the pawn on e6 helps black control some key squares such as d5 and f5. Also, having the pawn on e6 compared to f7 allows black to play rook f8 later in the game with some potential to attack on the f-file. So sometimes double pawns can be a good thing. In this case it is a good thing. So the game went bishop g5, white creates a pin, and black plays queen d7, getting out of the pin. And here black tries to castle queenside, which is a very interesting decision, and it sharpens up the game. When you have opposite sides castling, you should be thinking about how can I attack my opponent's king as quickly as you can. And the most common way to do that is a pawn storm, by pushing pawns towards your opponent's king. So I would like you to pause the video here and have a think about what you would play if you were white in this position. If you said b4, then yes, you're right, launching a pawn storm towards the black king. Black would play bishop b6, and now it's not so simple to continue the attack. You might play queen b1 just to defend the b4 pawn, and then you can play a4 and try and play a5. Another plan might be to play something like knight a4, so you could swap the knight for the bishop and then later on try and attack as well. But in this game Clarrie played pawn to h3, which I think is a mistake for two reasons. First of all, whenever you push pawns like that on the side of the board, pawn to h3, pawn to h6, pawn to a6, pawn to a3, unless you have a really good reason, it's a bit of a waste of time. But in this case, it's not only a waste of time, it actually creates a weakness in front of the white king. If you push pawns in front of your own king, it actually makes it easier for your opponent to attack. And we'll see later in the game why black could have used the pawn on h3 to attack. So white pushes his pawn to b4, which is a good move. And we had a bishop trade. Black plays rook to g8, loading up the rooks behind the pawns. So black wants to pawn storm down towards the white king. And here you see why the pawn on h3 actually helps black to attack faster. White played h4. And black makes a little bit of a mistake here. h5. The reason why that's a mistake is it blocks the pawns. If you're trying to attack, don't block pawns on that side where you're trying to attack. So this is another moment where you could pause the video and ask yourself what you would have played instead if you were black. If you said g5, you are correct, because that opens up lines towards the white king. And notice that it's a pawn sack, but in this case the important thing is that black has opened up the h-file. And now the follow-up is getting the queen to the h-file. So you should be thinking, how can I get my queen across? Obviously not straight away because the knight can take it. You could go queen g7 and then maybe queen h6, or if the knight goes back, queen h7. But the best way to do it is actually knight to g4, attacking the queen, and when the queen goes back, sacrifice the rook, and queen h7 with the unstoppable checkmate down the h-file, queen h2 or queen h1. If white tries to play f3, this is why the knight on g4 is really, really important. We have a checkmate straight away. And those of you that are sharp might have noticed also there was a rook sacrifice instead of queen h7, and this leads to a checkmate as well by force. So it's check, check, and finishing with a checkmate. Now coming back to this position, the reason why I played knight to g4 first is if you try and do the same thing without the knight on g4, white can play f3, and then white's king escapes. So white actually survives here. So knight g4 is the key, and then it all works. Okay, so pawn to g5 was what black should have played. That was the missed opportunity. Instead, h5, blocking the pawns. And now it's a little bit difficult for black to attack, but there was a little way that black could have tried to attack. Queen to e7, and you'll see why the queen there is important. And then if white played b5, takes, black has set up a little combination. So this is another moment where you can pause the video and see if you can find the winning move for black. The winning move is rook takes f3, because now after pawn takes f3, queen takes h4, and there is an unstoppable attack. The threat is queen h2 checkmate. If white takes the knight, pawn takes pawn, and now the rook on the h8 square is helping the queen, and there is an unstoppable checkmate either on h2 or h1. And by the way, if white tried to run away with the rook to create an escape square for the king, there's queen takes f2 check, and queen h2 checkmate. Not queen h2 straight away, because after king f1 check, the knight blocks, and then the king can run away to e2. So not queen h2, but queen takes f2, and queen h2 is checkmate. Okay, so hopefully that helps you guys in your games. If you look for those sort of ideas, how can you open up files? With opposite sides castling, usually your rooks are the heroes, so you try and open up rooks. So you're looking at how can this rook on the h file get opened up. So that's where the idea comes from, to get this position, and then if white takes, the rook comes alive on the h file. Okay, so let's return to the game. So white tries to attack with b5. White has a half open file now towards the king. But instead of going all the way back, perhaps Clarrie should have played rook b2, because that leaves the square on b1 free for the other rook, so he can double up rooks to attack the pawn on b7. And now white played queen b4, offering a trade of queens, and black has to accept the trade because the pawn on b7 and the queen is attacked. Actually, it just occurred to me that there is a move to avoid the trade of queens, and that's c5, because the queen then defends b7. So this was possible, but instead there was a queen trade, And black makes a mistake here, c5, allowing the rook to enter on that b6 square. So instead of c5, maybe knight c6 was safer instead. And white wants some pawns here. And I'm just going to fast forward this part because we're not really focusing on the endgame today. So white was in fact 4 pawns up. And then black got back a pawn, so white didn't need to lose that pawn on h4. White could have played g3. But still white was up 3 pawns, so it's still winning. Now 4 pawns up. And white made a mistake around here. So there was an opportunity to simplify things with rook c7 check, because black would have to take, and then you go knight e6 check, taking the rook. So that's just a fancy way of trading rooks, but it makes white's job a lot easier because this is much easier to win than when the rooks are on. But unfortunately for white, he actually makes a mistake here. He could have just moved the rook to a6 or maybe to d6 with check, but instead he left his rook on. And it's possible that the players might have been low on time at this point because it's quite a fast time control. So there were a few mistakes near the end, and the game ended in a draw. So let's just do a quick recap of some of the important moments in that game. So we had opposite sides castling, and remember the important thing in opposite sides castling is to try and attack as quickly as you can by pushing your pawns towards your opponent's king. And white made a mistake of pushing his pawn in front of his king. Then later in the game, remember this move that black missed, pawn g5, sacrificing a pawn to open up lines, and then we saw a pretty cool forced checkmate for black. So there was queen h7 or rook h1 and queen h7 with a checkmate. And then later on, there was another missed opportunity by black to play queen e7 and then sacrifice his rook to take the pawn on h4. And then remember, this was a forced checkmate as well. And then later in the game, after the queen trade, white won a bunch of pawns, and white should have won the game, but there was a couple of blunders in time trouble. Okay, so hopefully you understood some of those ideas in that game. When it comes to opposite sides castling, try and push your pawns towards your opponent's king as quickly as possible, and always look to open up lines towards your opponent's king. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.